talk about what it's like to be a millennial musician today. I'm your host, Julian Loida, and today we have a new episode with a new guest. This episode was recorded back in September, and I've begun touring my upcoming album, and I finally got some time to finish editing this podcast. I've been super deep in months of booking and PR prepping and strategizing and prepping my fundraiser and all this stuff. And now it's all been released since about mid-March, late March. I've had 2 new singles come out. You should go check out. I'm on tour, in the middle of touring my album. The album comes out May 19th. I'm so excited for this to be out in the world. You can pre-order the album through Give Lively. You can find the link in my Instagram bio. And you can pre-order vinyl or CDs. I have tote bags, probably more than I'm forgetting. Come out and support, buy a ticket. That would be amazing. Share with your friends. Share with people who live in the areas I'll be going to. You can check out the tour schedule online. Been playing with different groups. Just really swamped, busy, but I've been narrowing down my life into focusing mostly on music, and I have some other exciting news to be sharing of just kind of where I'm at. The last episode I put out was kind of me thinking about how much I had going on and was going to be coming up and how to do this all sustainably. And funny enough, about a month and a half later, I cut out a bunch of things from my life and now have a much more condensed thing, but it's still really insane, as every musician and indie artist that I know is in the same boat. I encourage you to support the Patreon for this podcast. That would be great. Give it, a like, subscribe, leave a review. That would be amazing. It amazes me every time I go on a hiatus of this podcast that people still listen through the episodes, which is so cool. Please continue to share it with friends. There is more coming with the podcast. This is something that's not going away. It's just a little slow right now because my life is totally bonkers. But I'm so excited. Today's guest is just an amazing human with an incredible story. And again, every time I interview my friends on the show, I'm always amazed on what I don't know about them and stuff. So I hope more of people who know Sheila already listen to this podcast, as I'm sure you're going to learn quite a bit. Such an amazing person. Go follow this person immediately. But please welcome to the show, Sheila del Bosque. Well, welcome to A Millennial Musician, Sheila. It's an honor to have you. You're one of my favorite people in the world and favorite musicians. I just always been amazed by you, your energy, your virtuosity, your ability to play rhythmically. And the more I've watched you grow, the more I've just been like, holy shit, I can't believe I know this person. As a conductor, as a film composer, sure, arranger, as a jazz musician, as a Latin jazz musician, as a classical musician, as a drummer, whether you're actually playing a drum or using air through the flute to play the drums. I think you sing also. It's just crazy. And the more too, I just turned 30 in June, and I've seen some people around me, friends, former friends, things like this, who have really hit the national and worldwide stage over the last couple of years and more recently. And I think, and it kind of happens sometimes just like one week to the next. Like all of a sudden someone's, whoa, now they're, big now. And before I'm like, well, and just that kind of whirlwind that I think we experience at this age. And you're someone who, I mean, that happens to you as well. But I know like you and people like Fabiola and many others in our circles, I'm sure, I think Albino will be like that too, that there's just going to come a day where all of a sudden, Chayla's blah blah blah, or Chayla one blah blah blah. It happened to your husband Nacho too. Like all of a sudden he's like, oh, got a Latin Grammy or nominated for Latin Grammys and things like that. It's like, or uh, writing music for some film for on who knows, But it's always really interesting to me because I kind of gauge these things from my parents, where they'll be like, oh my God, do you know that person? It's like, yeah, they're just like this person, and they were the same person yesterday as they are tomorrow, whether now you know about them or not, or you care about them or not. They're just this person, and they've been talented 10 years before they got famous, and they were just as good then. And anyway, I'm going on a rant about I have a lot of thoughts
Wow.
about this whole
Yeah.
thing. But you, I think, are someone like that, where all of a sudden it could be tomorrow, a week, a month, 5 years, and all of a sudden, it's gonna be like Jayla's blah blah blah, and I know that will happen. I don't
Wow.
know if
I
there's a
mean,
question in there, but
yeah. I mean, first of all, thank you for the invitation. It's like truly, it is an honor for me. It is so incredible because at the time you were saying all the things. It's like, is this who I am? Like
uh,
it is. I don't know. It is also this feeling about wow. I also do all these things, but you are not really conscious about that because you're
mm,
just in your journey of growing up. As a
mm,
musician and as a human being, and at the end, like sometimes we're trying to limit ourselves, but we don't have
yeah,
limits, and everything is so just connected. Like performance and classical music that I don't really believe in that term, like classical. It was actually
mm,
not classical.
mm,
At the time it was
mm,
happening, but it was just like popular music, like
mm,
people was actually dancing and enjoying that music so much. But like these boundaries as that we musicians or just put sometimes into the music just to build categories or to make distinctions in music and or life, they're just social constructions. So
mm,
at the end, everything is just the same, like popular music, jazz, or classical music, just music, or it's just a language you want to share with people to heal or just, to share who you are through music and what is the language you want to share with people and to the world. And, and that's also true for the composition, for the arrangement, for the conducting. So where you were actually saying all the things, it actually seems like are separate things, but at the same time it's just all the same. It's so together. It's just a language that is just music. And for me, and we will probably talk more about that, but because I started when I was just 10 years old, like music was my language to say a lot of things when words were not enough.
mm,
So I have this connection, of course, especially with the flute, because it is also a wind instrument, so it's so connected to the sensation and feeling of breathing and
mm,
talking, and saying words almost as your extension. It's an extension of your voice. So for me, music is that. It's just an extension of who I am and what I need to say to the word, and it is just a way of expressing myself and like my truly inner self. I don't know. It's just such an honest word to communicate with each other, and it's such a wonderful thing that people from a lot of cultures, different backgrounds, can just communicate through music, and
mm,
that's like a superpower.
mm,
I was saying the other day, like we have this superpower that is music, that we
mm.
can heal to others, we can heal to ourselves, we can discover more about ourselves through music. Yeah, I just feel so grateful to have it and so blessed that I have music in my life.
Yeah, I feel that with that's so interesting with the breath for the flute is your kind of main thing that people know you as is as a flutist. And as a drummer, it's interesting you can get people physically into like a place of meditation by just playing quarter notes, like very simple arm movements, making some sounds and in a repeated way, and you can really get people into a quickly into a kind of a meditative state. And I can imagine as a flute teacher and a flutist, that your like main source of energy is air, that must be a place where you're immediately starting from the beginning about breathing. I think that's really fascinating. How has for the flute and the breath, like, and you're talking about be able to express your inner self through the flute, how do you feel like the flute kind of is similar and different to the voice, both in talking and singing and just the expressiveness that we can use through our voice? How does that relate to the flute? How can you be as expressive with the flute that has these like buttons on it, and with the breath? Can you kind of bridge that gap for me?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as I was saying before, like I think definitely, the element of the air that you are blowing through something, that's something incredible connected to the voice. And in music we also have articulation, so it is also like so many different ways to say the same note, and to perform or to play the same note, but you can perform it staccato or, like very short, or you can
Mhm.
perform it really long, or you can perform it, like really soft or forte as it is the same. You are actually articulating words, or you just can say it in different dynamics, or you just can play the same note but repeating that note just to make an emphasis on the note. It's like it is a language, and actually good performers know about the grammar of music because it is the same. Knowing actually how to perform an instrument, for me, is actually incredible connected, to your inner self and to language, because we're talking about the same things: how to breathe when we're, talking to each other, how to articulate things in a way that can be understandable for other people, how to actually, like touch others people's heart through your music. That's like this extra punch, this extra element in your music that, because like right now with all the technology we have access to, is like we can just put a MIDI orchestra there. You just can put a bunch of libraries and amazing libraries, and of course, actually, those libraries were recorded by real performers, real musicians. But what is the difference actually of the act of playing something also live? Is that you have this connection that you are actually performing, in this space, in this room, with this specific audience, and it can be actually the perfect audience for you at that moment. It can be for that audience the perfect place and the perfect musician for you that you need to listen to at that moment. So it's this connection also, like with the real thing, and the experience of being performing and being touching souls through that instrument, that, well, in this case can be the flute, or can be actually any instrument, is so connected to the human soul. But the interesting is that you're using this instrument to get, right to that. That's why actually sometimes the singers have this wonderful thing, that is they actually have the instrument inside them, like it's the voice. The interesting thing, with the flute, is that we're using an external thing, and then our souls are actually through that external, let's say, element or instrument, to communicate what we want to do. But we spend so much time, in the practice room with this instrument, that we actually master the way that we can actually communicate ourselves in such a deep way through those instruments, to actually touch the hearts of the audience. But it's full actually of the same, let's say, I don't want to say rules, but the same, tools that we actually have in any language: articulation, breathing, dynamics, and how to master that, and then how to go for that deeper feeling. Okay, I now master all the techniques, but now actually, how can I get deeper into that and really touch your heart by music? How can I actually communicate my soul through that? And for that, actually, you actually need to know you good, like to know you well, because you want to be honest with your music. You want to communicate what you're really feeling. It is something about, when we're improvising, like you don't say or you don't play if you are actually not hearing it first. So you hear it first and then you play it. That's why, a lot of people is actually playing a bunch of notes, in a very virtuoso way, but they're not communicating really, because it's just you're in automatic pilot, but you're not really meaning it. Like, if you really mean it, if you're actually really hearing it before then you play it, so you're really meaningful about that. But yeah, like it's so powerful, and it's so incredible powerful if you can actually master the art of actually getting this flute, this element, this tool, this instrument, and then put your soul through that, and then that audience actually can listen to it, can feel it, and is actually connected to your field. That's amazing, because you are actually giving the gift of your soul, and your experiences and your story, so people can feel that, definitely, when you're being honest with your music.
Such great reminders of, yeah, hearing it before you play it. And I think that's something I, I so feel is that along with studying music, you have to study yourself. You have to study where you come from, where you want to
Absolutely.
go, what, and just be so self-aware of like what really moves me, and be honest with yourself and like go after those things and just put the puzzle pieces together of who you are. We kind of, especially as musicians, we get so, particularly as classically trained musicians, though I think jazz musicians, anyone who
Hmm.
studies pretty hard, like you can get so wrapped up in the technique to get to this point, And if you're not careful, you can get to the end and be just like playing really fast or whatever, and it means nothing. And you might still get gigs, and you might still be enabled by audiences and enabled by presenters and enabled by fellow musicians who also haven't done the inner work. But at some point, things will fall apart.
Yeah,
And I think
definitely.
that is such an important part of the journey that not every teacher, because they haven't done that work often, talks
That's
about. But
true.
I think it's so important and such a difference maker. And I think it's the difference between people who can play just a quarter notes or something so simple, and it be so profound. I think that's why Mark Rothko, like painting a rectangle on a rectangle canvas is so powerful, because he went through these things. Or I That's my feeling about his work. But um,
Absolutely. I mean, we're
mhm,
storytellers, human beings love story, and we are actually we're creating our history, and in our culture through stories. So if you don't tell any story through your music, it's like it's not connected to your nature.
can you tell me a little bit about the flute? I have these kind of stupid, like kind of initial stupid questions of why is the flute so expensive?
Wow. In general, actually, like musical instruments are expensive.
Right. Drums are not
So
so expensive.
exactly, and
Some
the
of them
flute, of
are.
course,
Some of
is
them are.
included. But if you actually think about an oboe or
Mhm.
bassoon, it's actually more expensive than a
Wow.
flute. And of course, then you have like different kinds of flutes. Like you can have a flute of $30,000, or
Wow.
you can actually have a flute of $1,000.
Wow.
It's gonna depend of basically actually the material of the fluid. If
Mhm.
it's nickel, if it's silver, or if it's gold, if it's
Wow.
actually silver plate or it's actually fully silver. Like,
Mhm.
and then of course, the brand,
Mhm.
how prestigious is that brand, and then
Mhm.
you have all those kind of different models and different brands and different combinations of those metals,
Wow.
and then like different kinds of improvements to the mechanism of the fluid,
Mhm.
from the very basic, and then like to actually mechanisms that are very complex that solve you a lot of problems, really flutes that are made for yourself, just for
Oh.
you, like
Wow.
with your size of fingers, with your requirements. So like, or a
Mhm.
diamond in the crown of the head joint, like you can have all kind of
Mhm.
different flutes, but it's going to depend mostly on the material. If it's silver, gold, or nickel, or even platinum, that is actually more expensive. Or if you have any costume work on your flute, like you have all those kind of interesting stories about pieces of diamonds on the flute, and like it's a very can be actually a very complex work. I was actually recently visiting the Haynes factory, because actually Haynes is one of the most well-known brands in the flute world, and it's actually a Boston brand.
Mhm.
And I was visiting them, for one day, and I was spending the day with them, and I was actually visiting the whole process of how to build the flute, and it's incredible complex, and you have so many steps, and people is like just spending hours and hours, and then it's just a whole team with so many different processes, and you actually imagine like a lot of those processes are made by just machine, or like artificial intelligence and all that, but
Mhm.
actually a lot of the process is just manual by a team of people just doing some control over the fluid, just making sure everything is just perfect. They are not going for okay, it's like it's incredible. So it's an incredible amount of time, of people, of also of the value of the metal itself. So it's gonna depend on that. I guess that's and when you actually go to those places, like okay, now I know, and now I kind of understand what actually is worth it. But again, it's gonna depend also of your needs. If you are probably studying the flute, you don't need a flute of $10,000.
Mhm.
You probably can get a flute around $1,000 or less, and it's gonna
Mhm.
be actually a great flute for you to start. That's actually the short answer.
Mhm. And I just have one more nerdy question about it. So, can you can you tell me the difference between the materials and the sound that occurs? Like in drums, it's mostly different types of wood and different densities. But what is the knowledge of performing flute tales of the sort of materials to the sound? What's the differences? and how air moves through it and things.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's very related to resonance, basically,
Oh,
and the
okay.
color you get.
Mhm.
So, for example, like a lot of people could say, like the gold is actually better than the silver, but it's actually a matter of preference. For
Mhm.
example, I was actually, and also of the kind of music you play. I was trying some gold flutes, and then I was actually trying some silver, and I actually realized I really prefer more the color that the silver gave me, because it was very bright, and sometimes gold can actually be darker, in the
Mhm.
color. The nickel is actually more from just students flute, because
Mhm.
you don't actually get a lot of resonance and a lot of deepness in the sound.
Mhm.
um, and like the platinum is incredible in terms of the resonance and the material, so that could be like the maximum level, let's say, in a way.
Mhm.
But first of all, I think it's just a matter of taste and the different colors you get
Mhm.
playing those flutes. Also, if you play, for example, jazz or popular music, like you perhaps want to have a silver flute, because just the sound itself is brighter, it
Mhm.
resonates a lot, it gives you this color that just project a lot. And sometimes the gold can be darker in this way. So if you're playing with a rhythm section, maybe you don't want particularly that color and you prefer maybe the silver. So it's going to depend also of the setup. But maybe if you're actually playing with an orchestra in Germany, it's actually now very common that they're using, the flutes made of wood again,
Wow,
just to
right.
get that color of the flutes of the classical baroque period, when actually were made of wood. That's actually
Mm.
why the flute is considered a woodwind, because from the Renaissance, Baroque, and classical, even actually some early Romantic period, actually the flute was just a wood
Mm.
instrument. So it's gonna depend of a lot of things, and actually the wood flutes are actually coming back in a lot of the orchestras
Mhm.
because of the color you get. So it's actually a matter of preference and what kind of color you want, and what kind of music you're actually playing, what's good for this kind of music.
See, I love this stuff. I mean, I think it's a very, like, some people might be like, "Oh, this, kind of a bogged down in this type of thing," but I think it's really important because of food. I'm going to make the metaphor of food. I think we think of the flute, and this is all instruments and all things in the
Hmm.
world. Everything's been so commoditized or whatever. Like when a recipe says to use salt, or when we think of salt, we there's the point is there's a million different kinds of salt, and they all taste a different amount of saltiness,
Uh-huh.
and they all have a different kind of profile of that, and they all take a different amount to arrive at something. Flute is the same way with the different metals. Anything is like this. When we think about a banana, we don't, at least in the US, you grew up with a certain kind of banana, but there's a lot of different kinds of bananas. Same with like all these fruits. We've been so served, or at least in the US, served these things and told this is what this is and this is what this looks like. And it's just not the case. Like when I think of a flute, I 100% always think of a silver flute, and then that has different material of made it. But there's just the world's just so much more rich than I think we're led to believe, and I think that's why I'm so fascinated by that and what you're saying. It's like there's just always more. It's always deeper than what we think on the surface level. Like it's always more complicated. And people and humans for centuries have worked so hard on this stuff and developed so many varieties, and there's so much to it. I just think it's fascinating, and it's so cool to see like how universal that complexity is. That what I see in the flute is something we see all across the board. So I just love that. That's so cool. I also have to kind of push you on. Last time we were hanging out, we did a program together, which was really fun.
Yeah.
And on the way back, we had such a wonderful conversation. And one of the things you talked about was how you have a pretty strong feeling about the need for students and for people and for our colleagues and probably myself to focus on just do one thing, learn one instrument and get really good at that. And by getting really good at one thing, you then know how to get good at anything. And I think that's brilliant, and I'm so in that. But I think it's so interesting for you, and talk me through, and I know this is kind of a life story question, but the process of like getting really good at the flute. But at what point in that journey did you start to branch off and be like, but I also want to do this. I also want to study jazz. I also want to become a conductor. I also want to get into film composing. Like at what point in that journey of becoming an amazing world class flutist did you decide to also put on your back on this like hike up the mountain, like put this load and this load? Like, how did you come up with that strategy? And how did you kind of relay that focus into these other things and yet still in the end say that people need to focus? Because you actually have a really
I
wide
know.
range.
Actually, this is a great question, and it actually makes me think a lot about myself. I think it's all about foundations, also. Because when we're kids, when we're really little, for me, it's very important to have good foundations.
Mm,
And that's why I actually told you about this thing. Like when you actually learn one thing, you know so many things because you are
mm,
actually also knowing about commitment and
mm,
about discipline. And like because it's so easy. Of course, I mean, like don't get me wrong. I actually love when kids just try different things because I was this kind of kid. Like, I was also in ballet and I was in
mm,
theater, but it was like
mm,
after like 10, I say, okay, like life actually put me into this journey of music. And just because, of course, the system in Cuba is like, it's so unique in that way. Like, we actually started to study music when we were like 10 years old, and this was true for wind instruments, guitar, and percussion. Like for piano, for example, and strings, you actually start when you are like 7 years old, because actually you start this journey when you're so little. You learn so much about yourself. And because it was like flute and that's it, I was like, wow, I was actually like studying 8 or more hours a day, just my
mm,
instrument. So it was like this deep connection with my instrument.
mm,
It was actually the possibility of enjoying my free time as a contrast of actually making an effort. Before, like I had this contrast in my life, that I was, because I was spending also like 8 hours, I could have just vacations of 2 months just like doing nothing. And I think also like this act of doing nothing in a way is
mm,
so important also for the
mm,
kids. Sometimes I feel we live in a society that we are trying just to overdo things, and we're just trying to fill our free time with a lot of stuff at the same time.
mm,
And we actually do the same with kids. And I think when you're a kid, you actually need that free time, and free time with yourself. Just spend hours in one instrument, and if you actually have something like a challenge coming, how actually you solve that challenge in that, because it's so easy, like say, oh, like this is challenging, I will just switch to ballet now. Oh, this is challenging, I will just actually switch to playing Nintendo now. So you don't actually learn about failing, and actually how just to deal with that failure, with yourself. And because I actually didn't think about a change, I didn't actually think about switching, because I did a commitment, like when I was 10 years old.
mm,
Like, okay, this is gonna be my career, this is gonna be my focus 100%, this is gonna be like the most important thing in my life. I learned so much about life and myself through music, because I was focusing in that. Because when I had, because when I was facing failure, I actually needed how to solve it. I was not just running out of it. When I was, having any issues, I don't know, I was just learning about myself and about how actually to overcome that. I was not just running out of it. And like discipline as well, like just spending 8 hours, but for example, I don't know, not playing in a computer, you know what I mean, or not
mhm.
playing video games or whatever.
Yeah.
Like just fully commitment into that.
Mm,
Of course, I'm not saying that was a perfect system. You have actually a lot of things that are not so good, that I feel like, wow, like I could try so many things now that I was missing in my childhood, just because
mm,
I was spending so much time with my instrument, that I was
yeah.
like, wow, I never did that. And I
Mhm,
now I'm
mhm,
seeing all those kids that are like just playing around and playing sports.
mm,
I wasn't actually never into the sports, because I was afraid, oh, my hands are so important, and
mhm,
how about if actually I get an injury just playing sports. Like,
mhm,
I was so committed to that, that it was actually, I felt in a way I didn't have like a full childhood, you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But something I learned is, in a way, you know, how to be brave about life
Mm-hmm.
and about the things, you know, and about the bad things actually life can bring you, and how actually to face that. Because, you know, like, just by studying music you learn so much about life, because it is the same in another scale. So that was actually what I meant. But, you know, when you're focusing in
Mm-hmm.
one thing, because you're getting so deep into that, you're learning actually everything about that, and then you just can transpose that to everything in life. And then, because you have all those tools since you're a kid, then you can actually go from there with a good foundation and just explore the world. But when you're just trying and you don't overcome failures, and you just run out of your issues or your problems, and you think you're not enough, and you don't prove yourself, and you don't expose yourself all the time to the limits, and you don't go out of your comfort zone, and you know, like, and you actually don't expose yourself to criticism, or,
Mm-hmm.
you know, it's hard there. Like, if you're hiding all the time, and running out all the time of your problems, it's like that, then you actually translate that to life. But if you're actually, like, you know, learning that through music, that is actually, I think, it's a great way of learning, you know, especially when you're a kid. Then you just can have all those tools. And then, you know, like, because I had a good foundation with flute, I knew actually the perspective of being in an orchestra. So now that's actually a great experience for me to be a conductor, because I know
Mm-hmm.
actually how it feels to be there.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was playing so much music from composers, I know actually sometimes what musicians are expecting for you as a composer. You know, like
Mm-hmm.
I was saying before, like, everything is so related then. But for me, like, in my opinion, you need actually to start with a good foundation.
Mm-hmm. Or I think of this in realms of film. Like if you're an actor, you're also, if you get good enough, you're also learning how to direct. Or if you're
Absolutely.
even like doing sound or camera, maybe you could do camera and then you know how to act, and then from act to direct or whatever. I'm sure there's a million different ways, but this sort of thing, as you work in this environment, if you're aware and you're open and you're sort of thinking beyond yourself, which in any good team you would be, and especially in an orchestra, which could have 70 to 100 people, you can really start to uh, put that all together and move beyond just your part. I think that's kind of the lost beauty of the orchestra, in terms of something that I don't always hear my friends talk about, or I don't even hear specifically to an audience. I think one of the stories of the orchestra that isn't talked about as much is the way that it's amazing how you can get 90 people to play together. And maybe that is talked about a little bit, but I'm trying to go a little
Uh-huh.
deeper with it, of to like truly interlock, like truly play
Yeah.
together. So much now is duos, trios, the Beatles were four people, like, but imagine 90 people who are just some of the best on the planet at what they do, went through some of the rigorous training for what they do, playing together. It's just like unfathomable, really. And I think it is so crazy to think about uh, how they're able to play together. And I think through doing that, and when those musicians are thinking about the larger picture, and I think it is fascinating how people can move. So many people become conductors who are players. I think it's just a fascinating process to be in that setting where, by listening to the violins over and over again, you're learning how to conduct them, you're learning how to arrange for them, you're learning how to compose for them. And that was my experience in orchestra too, was sitting in the back of the room. And as a percussionist, you can really just tune out, because you're literally resting forever to play like a triangle note or a cymbal swell, let alone crash. And I used to just sit in the back and just take notes rigorously. I have these notebooks somewhere in high school, and I just used to take notes constantly, of just almost like free flowing thought, or things the conductor said. And I would just listen to the strings and listen to the woodwinds and listen to the brass and listen to what the conductor would say to them. What notes would they give them? And I knew it would affect me, but it just was important, because it was just important because they were, for me, my teammates or my colleague, whatever. Like, I was working with them. But I think it is something that sometimes is lost, is in the training, to not only study the other instruments because it's like something you're supposed to do to check a box, but because it genuinely will like expand your creativity, and you can therefore engage with that their language or their dialect of the greater language so much better. And I think it's so beautiful because you've done that, and you're gonna and you're so young, you're gonna like, it's just the very beginning. It's just incredible. And I think it's also that you so transcended the flute. And I think that's something that I would want to encourage people to do too. Like, learn this, but know that you can always transcend all these things. Like, you can go so far beyond, and the goal is just transcend the instrument. So why stop there? Like, truly transcend the instrument, compose, arrange, create, like work with dancers, like truly transcend this thing. And I think it's so great how you've done that, you've and how you explained it. It's amazing.
Oh, thank you. I mean, like, I think the most important thing here is also like this comes naturally to you
Mm-hmm.
because, like, I mean, I didn't have actually a clue that I was actually, going to conduct or
Mm-hmm.
compose. Like, it was just like a consequence. Like, because I came to Berklee just like to switch, to the jazz, just because I was a flutist and that's it. So I actually wanted to explore more like the popular
Mm-hmm.
word and not just like classical music. Then I started with the performance in jazz, but then it's like, hey, because I had a default tuition, I always actually love, but just watching movies. And then it's like, why I actually going to start doing some film composing, and then there we go. And then because I was conducting my sessions in the film composing, it's like, oh
Mm-hmm.
my god, but I just love to conduct. And then like it was just so natural. And then like now I'm just connecting that conducting word also like to the social changes. That's why I'm also like organizing a concert with living women composer. That is a concert we're
Mm-hmm.
gonna have now in October 15, and I'm super excited about that. And
Mm-hmm.
now it's gonna be like me. I will be
Mm-hmm.
performing the flute, like classical, but I will also improvise and with electronics, and I will
Mm-hmm.
conduct the orchestra. And like one of the pieces is actually my composition. So like I'm trying to now unify all the
Mm-hmm.
things I have been doing, in the past years, and all the things I am. I mean, but my thing here is like it was just like natural to me to do all these journeys because it's actually related to what I want. That it. I mean, after a while, after actually playing in orchestras, I say, like I love it, and I love actually, how to play in orchestras and that word of communication and listening to each other. But then I actually felt the need of composing my own stuff and actually bringing something new to the table, of the music repertoire. And I think it's so important for living women composers to have also a space. Like
Mm-hmm.
I was actually reading, it's just like 5% of actually the repertoire in concerts in classical music are women composers, just 5%. And
Mm-hmm.
just 1% of that are actually by Asian and Black women
Mm-hmm.
composers. Just 1% of the repertoire. And I think we definitely need to change those numbers.
Yeah. And I think the thing for some of the people who are not as like deep into that, I think that one of the great traumas and issues of what you're saying, of that statistic, is that it leads people to believe that black women, Asian women, whatever, all women don't compose music. Like, that's not a thing that women do. And it fucking is. and
Oh,
and it
yes.
always has been that way. And it just is further showing the systemic like injustices and this all the systemic issues, and the patriarchy. Like, it just further shows how deep that is, because it is so not true through whether it's history, but obviously who told history. But it's just, that's for me one of the things I want to send home with that type of thing, is just one of the many things to send home with that. But one of the things is just that I think it leads the world to believe, and it leads more women to believe that that's not something that they do. And it's just, and so it's just like, yeah. And I think it's hard too, because maybe not hard is not
Hmm.
the right word, but we're in a time now where orchestras and presenters are trying to lift up these voices that were previously unheard. And so it feels like, maybe to some audience members or something, that, oh, there's all of this, where was the past or whatever. And it's
Yeah.
like this, it feels like overdoing like one side of it or something like that. And it's just like still so far from enough. Like, it's still like so crazy far from enough. So I really appreciate that you bring that up because it's so true, and I think that concert you're gonna do is gonna be amazing.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I hope like, to contribute just a little to that because it's so much to do, absolutely. And
Hmm.
but also we have so many incredible women like changing that.
Hmm.
And like also at Berklee, when we have all these programs of music gender with Terry
Hmm.
Lee Carrington, for example, that
Hmm.
she just actually released a book about women composers in jazz, like something like that. That's
Hmm.
amazing because, like if you go, it's not about classical music, but it's also in jazz. That happens in every kind of music. And when you go to the standards, like how many women do we have there in the jazz standards, in the real book,
Hmm. Hmm.
and then you have so many great composers, to the whole history that their voices were silenced. So I think there's also a lot, to
Hmm.
do. But also we have like incredible women composers and musicians and artists doing something to change that.
Hmm.
So I think the future is looking brighter.
I'd love to go back to the beginning and kind of learn a little bit more about Baby Chayla. So, Baby Chayla is from you're Cuban, and can you talk about growing up in Cuba? What it looked like, what it smelled like, what your experiences were like, how music came into your life, and just sort of the that world, and where and how classical music as well entered your life as you were growing up.
Wow, such a deep question. Well, baby Shayla. I mean, yeah. I mean, it is amazing. I love this kind of questions because I'm always actually going back to that because, as I said, like the foundations in our life are so important to understand the person we are now. Because a lot of the values we actually have today were formed at that moment. So like I was so blessed to actually be a Cuban person and and to grow up in such an special country. My family was like it wasn't a perfect family because I don't believe in that, but it was actually I have great parents that they were actually always supporting me as a child, and I think that's also important. And I think they were actually great parents because even when the economical situation and the
Mm,
political situation wasn't the best, they were actually always trying to create those fantasy words for me to be like and I'm so grateful for that because that was so good for my creativity, like even if the situation wasn't the perfect situation, I was living in a bubble. In a way, I was living in my bubble, in the bubble I created, in the bubble my parents created for me of fantasy, and I was such a creative kid, and that's why actually I always knew I was really into the arts, and I tried like painting, theater, ballet, music. I tried everything, and then like I decided at 9, and it's so funny because like yeah, when I was 9 years old,
yeah.
like if I was too old, but I mean, just growing up in Cuba, I mean, I think it was amazing being surrounded by that culture, that sea, that salty, warm
Mm.
sea. That is so important for my soul. I have such a
Mhm.
deep connection with the sea, and I think that's true for everyone that actually grew up in an island. And like this actually thing I said about like wasting your time in a way that is not wasting. You know what I mean? But actually having
Mhm.
this free time for a kid, that was so true for me especially when I was actually very little before the music. I was just like playing around, doing nothing, spending time with my parents, going to the beach, to camp, exploring, having a bath in downpours, like playing with the earth, with the dust.
Mm.
I was so connected to the nature and to I don't know, and to such a deep, real feelings of community, family. I think this is like kind of an important thing also, and it's part of the Latin culture in general,
Mhm.
the concept of family and the concept of culture, of being together, of partying, and like, and by doing parties I mean like just cooking, the act of cooking, the act of dancing, listening music, sharing from a perspective of such a deep and cultural way, when we're putting just like the Cuban music, dancing with your parents. I think that's such a great feeling, like eating together, laughing. Like I have all those memories, and still when I'm going, I'm always connecting to that part that sometimes, like I miss here in Boston, of course, because
Mhm.
like even, of course, if I'm married and I'm having friends, it's just different. It
Mhm.
feels different, and
Mhm.
also Boston is such a city that people is just moving around and so focused in their careers and their
Mhm. Mhm.
own personal journeys that they're
Mhm.
just moving around, like wind, but we're missing the earth element, so that was the way I was growing up, and I think it's great, and I was so blessed to have an incredible family. I was actually the first musician of my family that I know, at least.
Mhm.
But also my father, for example, he's so musical, but he couldn't actually never play any instrument. But I know he has like this frustration, like he would love to be a musician. And but I was actually the first musician of my family, and I started when I was 10 years old, and in a very strict system of like classical music, 100%. Something interesting about Cuba is that we don't have
Mhm.
a system that is actually very inclusive, so we don't include almost like Cuban popular music or
Mhm.
jazz, of course, or any kind of music, but just actually like classical music, classical European music.
Can I ask a question about that?
Absolutely.
So I think that's really fascinating.
I
You know,
know, it's not.
because when I think I studied a lot of Cuban music for some time, and in the more recent years, I've been really. I just came back from Puerto Rico. Even it was my fourth
Awesome.
visit in the last about a year and a half. But Puerto Rico has such a intense history of the oldest colony in the world,
Hmm.
and Cuba is not a colony, though.
No.
Right, exactly. So
Yeah.
that's what's so fascinating to me about how it almost that to me rings of like colonization to teach Western classical music,
I
like
mean,
indoctrinated. But where am I
yeah.
off there, or like that's just kind of wild to me?
I know it's wild. I mean, we're not right now, but we were,
Right.
so, and for so many centuries until actually the 20th century.
Mm-hmm.
So we actually have such a strong influence of course, Spain and
Mm-hmm.
the European culture in general. So, like even if we're not a colony now, of course, like we have such like an influence of that European culture,
Mm-hmm.
and we started from there. Like the first schools, the first system of education, they started actually with the classical music.
Mm-hmm.
That's why it's so important. So the music that we play, like rumba, or like all these African things, of course, that's very related also, like to what was validated at that time, and this kind of, let's say, more black music.
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't actually like the music people wanted to study and the music that was validated in the academia. So if you think about the schools or the conservatories in the 19th century in Cuba, a lot of these were actually run by people with who actually was studying in Europe or Spain, or in the
Mm-hmm.
conservatory of Paris, like
Mm-hmm.
Cuba actually, if you think about that, was colony of Spain
Mm-hmm.
until the 20th century. So a lot of the influence we had, it was actually coming from Spain and of course from Africa, for the slavery process.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, it totally makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
The question is why still we're actually going into that system.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's also very true sometimes for some countries in Latin America to validate what is actually coming from outside
Hmm.
at actually something that is better than what we actually have in our countries. And that's a mentality that actually comes from the colonialism.
Right.
If you think about the history of those countries, even if we don't have it now, like think about how many centuries we had it. So it's actually pretty new for us and for the mentality in Cuba not to
Mm-hmm.
be a colony from a European country or from another country. And if you think about this, after that, we actually were occupied by the military occupation of US.
Mm-hmm.
So we always actually had, something that was better, like a culture that we actually were validating more than our own culture. That's why I actually think it's very related to that. And because they think that you don't need this kind of music in an academia, that you just learn it from the street, and from just playing
Mm-hmm.
with people. So they actually don't have this mentality about putting it together in a method. And because actually a lot of the people who actually play in those environments are just people that they don't have a method for it, so they actually never, I don't know, wrote a book about that, or they actually never thought about writing a book. And if actually you think a lot of about a lot of the books we actually have now about salsa, about actually
Mm-hmm.
Cuban flute, or
Mm-hmm.
in popular music, a lot of those books are actually by people who were visiting Cuba. They
Mm-hmm.
were not Cubans, and they were actually writing a book after visiting Cuba and putting
Mm-hmm.
all that into method. But actually, a lot
Right.
of those books are not actually made by Cubans.
Mm-hmm. Totally. Same for drums. Yeah. I guess in a way it's interesting that that music is not in the conservatories, in that maybe it kept some of those traditions from being whitewashed
Oh
instead of
yeah,
putting them,
absolutely.
so it.
Yeah, I think it's also like a thing of validation. Like, for example, because I think things are more flexible now. But back in the days, if you were playing a tumbao, in a conservatory, that was like, what you are doing, you can't play this. Here, you
Huh.
just play Bach and Mozart. Like, this is not the music we're validating here
Mm-hmm.
as
Right.
good music. So that's something to think about.
Can you tell me a little bit about that Cuban schooling where like was it sort of put upon you that you were going to become a flutist at like age 9 or 10? Is that sort of how the system works? Like it's sort of you're put in a lane pretty early?
Uh huh. You know, it was actually my choice in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Like, when you are 9 years old, I guess it's like, yeah, I just want to try that. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and I wasn't thinking about the pressure about that. But of course, like, it's such an effort for a family, like, that their kids are actually studying music, because it's a privilege.
Yeah.
Buying an instrument,
Mm-hmm.
probably actually supporting, the student with extra private lessons or selfish or whatever, extra lessons if they need it. Like, but just by actually buying an instrument, we don't have, any music stores in Cuba when we can actually buy, for example, an instrument.
Mm-hmm.
So it's so hard just to get a new instrument. And of course, it's hard to get the money to get a new instrument. It was actually life changing for me and for my parents.
Mm-hmm.
That's why actually, even if I was little, I needed to do this commitment. Okay, like, if I want music, I really need to go for it, because also my parents are making this effort to support me.
I see.
And and they're going to spend a lot of hours just working to buy a second-hand flute. So it's also like this pressure
Mm-hmm.
you feel as a kid, that you need to do this. And once I actually took that decision, I wasn't really aware of that pressure, but now, as an adult, and just analyzing all that, I now I can realize, like, the amount of pressure I actually had. But
Mm-hmm.
this is something interesting. Like, in Cuba, a musician can actually have a better salary than a doctor. That's such an interesting thing. And
Mm-hmm.
that's true also for sports, for example. So in a society like US, for example, like, if you're a doctor or a lawyer, that's like,
That's
you
it.
got the job. And if you're a musician, it's like, okay, that's like kind of your habit.
Yeah,
But
right, right.
but if actually you're in Cuba and you're a doctor or a professor, it's like, that's actually not a really good job, and you need to
Mm-hmm.
make a lot of sacrifice, and you don't actually get well paid. But
Mm-hmm.
if you're a musician, you can actually travel around, you can go out of the country, you can see other
Mm-hmm.
cultures, you can,
Mm-hmm.
like, make more money.
Mm-hmm.
So it's actually like, okay, like, it's an effort, but at the same time, you can see the compensation of your effort. And it's
Mm-hmm.
really, I don't know, like, people, when they think about musicians in Cuba, in the Cuban society, they actually see it as something that is really great, especially
Mm-hmm.
because of that. So it was a lot about, like, that thing, of course, that simple thing as a kid that I just wanted to study music because I felt attracted to it, but also like that possibility I saw for my future, like just to explore and probably to go out of the country and see more possibilities and, like all get just well paid or whatever, and probably like help my family, and also this pressure of my family getting involved and doing all those sacrifices for me just to study the career. So, like it was a lot of factors
Mhm.
around my decision. And about the specifically for the flute, no, it was like, okay, what's available for me? The flute. Here we go. So, like I wish I actually could have like a more interesting story about that, but it was just like that. I didn't actually have a clue I was a flute, and I just knew it when I was doing the exams, because when you actually start in a school in Cuba, you actually need to go through different very hard exams, like tests
Mhm.
of like ear training tests, or like history of music tests, or
Mhm.
just like physical exams of just you and your instrument, and see your physical conditions and your abilities to play that
Mhm.
instrument. Like that can be like, I don't know, it was so fun. Like, and now just analyzing that moment, I see, oh, like a lot of those things are actually were wrong, because it's not about physical thing, and but like just the teeth or the lips or your hands, like just to play the flute, like a
Wow,
lot of the things
that's
you
wild.
actually go through a very complex and competitive process. It's
Mm.
not that, okay, I want to study music and that's it. It's
Mm.
very competitive actually to go into the system in Cuba.
How did then you find? I did Berklee come to Cuba? How did when did Berklee first come into your world? Like, what was the process of coming to Boston?
Yeah. I mean, like, when people actually ask that, it's like everyone knows about Berkeley. Like, I don't know why,
Like
how
Juilliard is like, how does everyone know about
exactly.
this?
Like, I don't know, the first time I heard about that, but just everyone knows about Berkeley. And at that time, even, if I was actually doing my undergrad, my first undergrad in classical music, and I was, again, fully focusing classical music, playing in orchestras. I was actually touring with a dance company, so I was actually playing some popular music as well, like
Mm.
some Afro-Cuban, jazz, flamenco thing. If, like I was exploring a lot of musical words at that time.
Mm.
So I really wanted, that to explore after my undergrad, the possibility of going to another country and study there. Because even if I was like doing a lot of cool, projects and all that, I was feeling stopped. Like, I wanted something else. And the kind of feelings I can't really tell, but just feel it. Like I want to change in my life. I want to go for more.
Mhm.
And I know that's the way, just going out of here and looking for more possibilities and
Mm.
explore more about music and and life, and looking for change, for a brighter future in my life, of possibilities and freedom. So I applied to Berkeley, and I remember at that time I was emailing admissions and all that, and explaining my situation, because it was impossible for me to travel and make the live audition. So
Mm.
I remember they did an exception. They say, okay, you can actually do it online, but you need to submit a lot of videos,
Mhm.
like contrasting videos with your flute. I did, videos of flute and flute with piano and solo flute
Mhm.
and all that. And I was submitting videos, and like I wasn't really expecting for me to get there. Like, but it's this kind
Mhm.
of things I need to try. I need to give it a
Mhm.
try, because I didn't have a clue about what was the level. And when we
Mhm.
actually hear Berkeley, you say like, okay, this is the best school in the world. So yeah, just like genius, and I don't know, because I didn't have any perspective of my
Mhm.
level. And then like I remember, like one day I was just after a couple of months, like I actually didn't know anything about Berkeley after submitting those videos and doing the application online. And I remember I actually got a call from admission to my Cuban number, and I was
Mm.
like, yeah, I just wanted to say, like, of course, like in a formal way,
Mhm.
nah, you were accepted into Berkeley with a full tuition scholarship.
Wow.
And I remember I was just, what? It's like, what's happening right now? And I was just crying. And it was
Wow.
just like, it was just awesome.
Mm.
But then, of course, like, I mean, it was not like a storytelling, like, it was not like, it was not the happy ending thing like in full tuition and that's it, like.
Mhm.
And I
Mhm.
was so naive and let's say that's it, but it wasn't. And
Mhm.
even if I got the full tuition, of course, I had all those other challenges that were like, housing,
Mhm.
food, traveling.
Yeah.
And I remember like, okay, but I can't, I really want to go to Berkeley. I just can't accept no as an answer.
Mhm.
So I saying like, hey, I would probably, because I remember that was for the fall semester, say I would probably not start in the fall semester. Just give me please a couple of months so I can actually get some more money. I don't know how, but I will get it.
Mhm.
Because of course, like, like the salary I could actually save after a few years, for example, like working in a dance company and a lot of stuff, it was like, I don't know, like $1,000.
Mhm.
And I thought that was enough. And like you do nothing with that
Mhm.
here in
Mhm.
Boston, especially because it's such an expensive,
Yeah.
expensive city. So I started like to save some money and to ask for money, sending thousands of emails at that time. Like in the fall of 2017, actually Trump
Mhm.
decided to close the embassy of U.S.
Mhm.
in Cuba. So that was another challenge.
Mhm.
And I remember like, wow, I felt so badly because I was like, wow, and how about now? Like, another thing,
Mhm.
another challenge.
Mhm.
That way actually when I said like when you're a kid and you actually learn one thing and you learn a lot of perspectives about that thing, you actually know how to overcome
Mhm.
problems. And that's
Mhm.
something I learned in life. And also by, being in Cuba, and also by actually learning about music and about myself, how actually to overcome problems in life, and you
Mhm.
translate that to everything. So I think something I have is that the resilience of, okay, this is a problem, okay, we're gonna get a solution to that.
Mhm.
And I just started like to reach thousands of people, getting emails. And I remember they made an exception for me that day in an embassy. Like I got a call in the
Wow.
morning and say, "Hey, Shayla, you have your interview, just a few hours. Come." And I was like, "What?" And I was, it was just so stressful. I was running into the embassy. It was salon. They actually treated us as a special case because I had the full tuition to attend Berklee, like
Mhm.
a very famous college. So I was actually an F1 visa. So it was kind of a special situation.
Can I stop
And
you here for a second or pause?
absolutely.
Because I'm a privileged shit American who doesn't know this stuff. So when
Yeah.
Trump closed the embassy, that meant that you could not as easily come to the U.S. Is that how that works?
Yeah. I mean, actually, it's never easy to come to US.
Right.
It's very hard actually for a Cuban to get a visa.
Mm.
That's why we actually, sadly,
Student visa included.
yeah, exactly.
Mm.
That's why we actually have all those, people just trying to come illegally to US because
Mm.
they're just desperate.
Mm.
Because it's very hard to get the legal way. But if you actually close the embassy, what that means is now you need actually to travel to another country first and then go to the US embassy in that country to apply
Oh
to
man.
go to US. So you need actually a third country to apply to your visa.
Mm.
So if I couldn't afford, even the
Mm.
travel to Boston, it's like
Mm.
going to another country, paying for my housing or hotel there, and then
Mm.
applying from there that could last months or
Mm.
so, for my visa. That was just impossible. But finally, I made it, and then after 1 week, I was here at Berkeley. So it's this kind of thing, and I
Wow.
struggled, like especially at the beginning. I
Mm.
had no money. It was spring, so I was imagining coming from Cuba. January, it was winter. I was frozen, and
Oh my
I was hungry, and it was hard,
God.
But everything passed, and I have this almost naive way of living that I just trust in life. Is this
Mm.
trust in life that everything is gonna be okay somehow?
Mm. I remember you saying when I learned that you're also a piano tuner. And I was like, "What?
We
You're a
forgot
piano
that part,
tuner?"
you
Yeah, we
see?
forgot that part until now. I was like, "Wait, you tune pianos?" And I was like, "Could you come tune the pianos in the culture center?" But I was like, "When did you learn to what?" And you're like, "Well, that was one of the ways I learned or I was able to make money when I moved to Boston. Was I you had already trained to become a piano tuner before you came over, or you or you did when you got here? But I mean, people like to talk about being gritty, and I'm thinking, of course, thinking about myself and like the things that I've done. Like when I was getting into IU, there was some things that I did to get in there and blah blah blah. But like this, I didn't know, and this is what's so great about doing this podcast is even people I know well, like I always learn these so much more about them. I mean, that is just amazing. Like it's just like really harrowing, and it's just it explains so much in a way, but it's just amazing, and it's always really a complex feeling that I feel when I learn about something I didn't even know about the people around me struggles, like about like that the when the embassy closed, that meant like I wish I should have known that, like for my friends in Cuba, like that. Oh, when that happens, then that makes this like, but you don't even know what you don't know because of the systemic
Of course, yeah.
thing, but it's still like really frustrating. So you moved to Boston, and I mean, it's like you moved to the Arctic, like the
I
capitalist
know.
Arctic. Like it's crazy.
Yeah,
How
I
did
mean,
you like move through that? I mean, I know it kind of, you said just time after time, but did you kind of stay in the US and stay at Berklee? Would you summer sessions? Did you kind of spend a period where you were just in Boston for quite a while?
I was actually coming directly to, to start the semester. I
Mm,
actually even missed my orientation week because
right.
until that point I didn't have idea that actually I could come or not. I was just,
Mm,
waiting for the embassy. And then
mm,
just one day I got that call. It was actually during the orientation week, and I say like, by this time, okay, I'm done. That's it. It's like I did
wow.
everything I could. And then I
Mm-hmm.
got that call,
Jeez.
and then after a week I was actually ready to start the semester. So, I missed my orientation week, first
Mm,
day, no idea about the Berkeley campus in a new city, just using
wow.
GPS,
Jeez.
frozen, hungry. I was actually living in Worcester.
Oh my god. You were living in okay, so
Yeah,
Worcester
so
is
that's
like
a part of
two
the
and a half
story.
hours from Boston,
I mean, because
depending on
yeah,
traffic.
I didn't have actually,
Jeez.
money to
Right.
have a housing or
Gosh.
food. So I actually accepted an invitation of some Cuban friends. They
Mm-hmm.
were actually living in Worcester, and thanks to them, I actually could spend my first month here and in
Wow.
their apartment, and and they were actually providing some food, but still it was
Wow.
like 2 hours,
Yeah.
like round, and like all the way, like 15 minutes walk to the bus stop, then bus stop to train station, then train station to
Mm-hmm.
Back Bay, then like 15 minutes or so walking to Berkeley
Mm-hmm.
every day,
Mm-hmm.
both ways. So
Mm-hmm.
it was just crazy.
Yeah.
And just getting used to the new system. I mean, I of course I was actually traveling before, and I visited some countries, but it's not the same. Like
Yeah. Of
just
course.
playing, or performing in an auditorium for a couple of days, just having this short contact with that society that just living, like making your life here. I didn't know how to use a card, like I didn't have
Mm-hmm.
any bank accounting, like I didn't have a clue about that. Like people just,
Yeah.
I remember my first time just tapping, a card for payment and say, hey, please, can you help me? I don't know how to use this. Like people
Wow.
was like, are you joking with me? Like,
Right. Right.
and it's like, no, I mean, I'm serious. Like it was actually my first time using a card.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Like, like small things, like from there to huge things, like like I don't know what's going on here. I didn't have a job and I didn't have money, but I actually
Mm.
wanted, and I was like kind of naive, and I just had this trust that everything was actually okay, and somehow you know but at the point I was just like, okay, I need to to get some jobs. So I was like babysitting, or I was like doing any kind of stuff in the meantime. Like I was
Mm.
actually studying uh, to work at Berklee, just tuning pianos, and I had,
Mm-hmm.
thanks to God, I had actually an amazing boss, Paul, and he was super patient with me, like just learning in the process. I remember my first piano took me like 6 hours to tune because I didn't
Mm.
have any clue about tuning pianos. And he said,
Wow.
like, I can't pay you for 6 hours. And I say, I know, 100% agree. And I will just, I will learn it.
Hmm.
But like things like that. But I was so desperate, and I wanted so much Berklee that I was just
Mm.
like, I'm gonna do whatever, like, because I want that. And I remember that at what point I was so desperate. I remember I did a fundraising concert for myself.
Mm. Wow.
Usually do for other things, but I remember I did it for
Oh
myself, and I
man.
invited people, and I had a band there, and I was putting together. And of course, in this journey, I sometimes, not sometimes, I'm actually so grateful for that, because
Mm.
if you think about, I don't know, after that, those are actually stories that make you stronger.
Hmm.
And if it's too easy, it's like you don't have stories to tell. And you
Yeah.
actually don't know enough people, and that's something also true for the how the society works here, because you have everything you need. You don't need
Mm.
anything from people. That
Mm.
actually affects the way people is actually interacting. You don't
Mm.
need your neighbors for sugar. You don't need your neighbors
Mm.
for a couple of rice. So
Mm.
that's why some people actually just they don't know each other, and they're living in the same building for years. You know what I mean?
Hmm. Hmm.
So when you actually need some things from people, sometimes your interaction with society is very different. And like, because I actually had all those needs, I was actually interacting a lot with people,
Hmm.
and I was
Hmm.
sending all kind of emails, like, and I'm putting this concert, and I don't have any money, so I need you to come. And like at that
Hmm.
point, it was like, oh my god, I can't really believe I'm doing this, but I'm desperate. So, and
Mm.
I really want Berklee, and I'm gonna do it.
Hmm.
um and I
Yeah.
was just doing all those kind of things, like, I just reaching out venues. I had this amazing band, we're playing Cuban music. um of course I didn't have any band. I was just like,
Hmm.
if you actually happen to reply to that email, that's gonna be my band, and we're gonna
Hmm.
put it together for that venue.
Hmm.
But I was just emailing and creating opportunities for myself, and that's actually what I'm doing now. Like, I don't believe in things coming to you, like,
Yeah.
I don't know, of course,
I'm the same way.
like, or destiny, or like, I'm creating the opportunities.
Totally.
That's a way of also controlling your opportunities, like
Mm.
if you're creating it, because I'm a flute player. Like, I'm always joking about that. Like, no one actually needs a flute. You need a bass, you need
No,
a,
they do.
a
They absolutely
piano,
do.
but you know what I mean. Like,
Yeah, I know what you
I'm not rhythm section, like, it's not fully necessarily, but I'm creating actually the opportunities for myself. And because I
mean.
was creating that, I was actually creating, like, the opportunities also, like, to become more creative about my projects or the music I'm doing, and exploring more journeys and paths in music, because I was trying to create those opportunities.
Hmm.
I wasn't waiting for someone actually to get me the opportunity.
Mm.
I'm always creating those opportunities, and that's a way of controlling my destiny in a way.
Wow, I think there's a few things that were extremely profound in what you were just saying. Um, for between people in the U.S. like not needing to interact and having everything, and I mean I think people joke about how we're gonna turn into the Wall-E with the people who are just like on chairs that fly around and the TVs in front of them, and
Yeah.
you know I don't think we're gonna turn into it. I think it's happening. It's not an if, it is happening, and I think it's already happened. I mean, you could absolutely do that if you wanted to, but I think it is. I just think that's a really profound thing that I know I'm gonna spend some time thinking about. I mean, I think also like it's so interesting. Like it's interesting to put this on a podcast and a record because you can hear at the beginning of this podcast how how incredible I feel what you are and how much you inspire me. And I wouldn't. I thought I had hit the ceiling of Chayla. Like I thought, not the ceiling, but I thought I but like like you blew the roof off of where I even held you, and like I can't even. You're just such a warrior, and like it's so unfathomable, but I totally relate to it in in certain ways, and I think what's also important to note is though like I can see like a movie being made about you now and like you writing a book about this like as you become more successful in your career like on a more even more global scale, that this is actually a really probably common journey for people coming to the US to go to Berklee or schools or anywhere, that this is, but I would even say, just to keep it local, like this is actually probably a fairly common story for people coming to Boston from different parts of the world, whether it's an island of in the Caribbean or Central, North, South America, or different parts of Asia and the Middle East. Like it is actually a fairly, it's not the first time I've kind of heard inklings of this, the depth of that, and people putting on concert for themselves. And like it's actually, and I just say that because it's, I think we forget that. I think it's all around us all the time. And because we're just kind of like, talking about the moment, which is good for certain things, but just to be aware, I think, of the world around us and the complexity of it. And I think also, like when you said knocking on the door or something, or maybe you were talking about the credit card, of like how to use it, and like just of like that common empathy in our lives of that you just don't know what's going on with people around us, and you don't
Yeah.
know what they've overcome or what they're overcoming, and you don't know, like you just don't know, what's people are dealing with, and just to try to slow down and like just give the benefit of the doubt, of things. And I think it's just such an incredible journey and your perspective on it. And gosh, I didn't know some of those things about Worcester and these things, but and I love to, like, it's so about creating opportunities for yourself. And it's so funny to me because on social media it totally sways a certain, like it totally makes it look like things just like fall from the sky. And it's like, no, they don't. Like they've never fallen from the sky. No, I mean some people maybe, but I think it's so reassuring and refreshing to hear you say that. Like, because yeah, sometimes when I see what the accolades that are coming your way, that it's like, oh my gosh, this and this, but it's like, no, she's hustling and on the ground hitting these things and doing these things and making these things happen for herself. And it's just incredible. And you know I would love to talk to you about film composing and conducting and more about growing up in Cuba, and for just the better advice of my girlfriend saying like, you need to keep your episodes short, which I'm just not good at doing. But I'll save it for another time, digging in to those things with you. But I'm just so grateful for the time and so grateful for you sharing these things. This was just a really, really profound and enlightening conversation. And I'm just, yeah, just so amazed and grateful. And I'm just so grateful all these things happen too, because if you wouldn't have come to the US and do all the things, I wouldn't have met you, and we wouldn't be here right now, and the people who are listening wouldn't be listening to it. And I think that's part of why it's such an affront to humanity when borders are closed, or when wars happen, or when like these things happen, because it's not just something on the news. Like people's kids will not meet people who will be really important to them. People will not meet friends, husbands, wives. They will not have kids. Like there's such a huge effect to all these things. It's not just a line at the bottom of a news channel. It's real, it's human. And because some people made some decisions, your life was more difficult, and then you were able to come here. Like like all these things are really affected by what happens. And so I just think it's sometimes we need a splash water on our face and kind of wake up to the reality, um, of what's going on in the world and what has gone in the world. So all to say, thank you so much for being here.
Oh no, thank you for the invitation. Like these kind of things are actually so interesting for me as well, because by answering your questions, I'm trying also like kind of understanding myself better.
Mhm.
Like I don't have a plan. Like all those questions I didn't know it in advance, and I'm just
Mhm.
like being in the spot and kind of actually answering to myself as well, and trying
Mhm.
actually to understand myself as well while
Mhm.
actually answering those questions. And like every time I'm actually into that, it's like a process of learning, like more about myself, more about how I actually see the word and the music. And your questions, I think it was great, and I'm so grateful to know you. You're also
Mhm.
such an amazing musician, and
Mhm.
you're also doing such an amazing projects. Like every time I also see you, like you're in a different amazing projects, like a lot
Mhm.
of like social activism and things actually related to a better society,
Mm.
and to actually to a great change of the society we're living in. So I'm so grateful. Actually, I know you that you're always inviting me to your projects, and actually to count you as a friend.
Mm. Thank you. It's very special. I almost forgot, but I've been ending the more recent episodes or last season or so with a question that I want to make sure I don't forget. So the final question I've been asking people is is a little hard, but you have time. Is if you could give me in one word, what does it mean to you to be a millennial musician?
I think freedom, and that's actually such a deep word for me.
Mm,
I think we're living such in a great time as well of freedom, of possibilities, of being creative, and show ourselves, like, and being ourselves, and just the way we want to be, and express that with fears, and with actually with a society that is changing so much, and actually is changing to a more inclusive word.
mm,
um, so that word is actually very important for me, and
mm,
and I think that's something I aspire every day to have in my music, and it's such a deep and strong word for me, like the freedom of, I don't know, of the possibility of express myself, and to be honest with my music, and the possibility of be creative, and just to make my life and my future and my music and my things the way I want it to be.
mm. That is a really striking, beautiful answer. I that yeah, that came. I was not expecting that. That's great. Everyone's answers are amazing to that. It's just like it's one of my favorite things. Thank you so much, Chayla. You're
Of
just
course.
amazing. Hopefully, I can get this episode out before October 15th. But you're putting on an amazing show that you just have to go to. That night will change your life and your perspective and put you, ground you, I'm sure, and just inspire you. You have to. So yeah, please let people know where to follow you. Check out your music on Spotify or buy your albums, support you, go to your shows. There's so many also things you're teaching at Wellesley now, which is amazing. You just won a big competition in Chicago or flute playing. Like, please, would you mind rattling off some accolades and some where people can find you of what's been going on with you in the last couple of weeks?
Absolutely. Well, you can actually find me on the social media in Facebook by Sheila del Bosque, and Instagram by Sheila de Cuba. And you can find actually my music in Spotify. I have two singles, like If My Island Were a Child, Si Mi Isla Fuese Niño, with my trio, and then another composition is a bolero,
Mm,
promesas, like promises. So I hope, like, you can check my music. I think it's just like, as I was saying, it's just an extension of my voice, of what I
mm,
need or what I want to express to the world. And like, come to the concert. I think it's gonna be great, and it's gonna be an opportunity to create those spaces for amazing living women composers, with stories to tell to the world.
mm. Absolutely. Thank you again, Jayla. You're amazing. Yeah, just thank you for being here.
Oh no, thank you again for the invitation. You are amazing for doing this. I think it's such a great work, and yeah, you're gonna be having me always here for for whatever you need, for everything you want, other projects. So I'm extremely grateful for every opportunity you give to me. So always grateful for that. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for listening to today's episode. Go follow Shayla on all platforms. Listen to her music, support her work everywhere and anywhere you can. Such an incredible artist. There will be more episodes coming, probably a little more rapidly in this month, and hopefully I'll be able to get more out soon. I got this USB mic, a new USB mic that's allowing me to do things a lot more easily, which is really fun. You'll be able to hear me on other people's podcasts. Please go follow me on my social media, sign up for my mailing list, stream my music if you can. It's really helpful, especially as I'm releasing new music. I have a new album coming out May 19th, a couple new singles and videos out now. New dance fills coming, just a bunch of stuff that I've been working on for 4 years. And I hope to open up about that process so much more. I'm really excited for what's to come and what's happening now. I'm touring my music. Go check out that tour schedule. See if you or any of your friends or family are around when I'm coming out. It's a really special experience to hear hopefully what I'm sharing with people these days. Consider joining the Patreon for this podcast. Just support independent artists, independent businesses anywhere you can. We'll have more episodes coming, so please continue to support live music whenever, wherever, and however you can. See you next episode.